The return to school on Monday morning felt like stepping onto a stage after forgetting the script. The hallways were the same, buzzing with the same trivial gossip and the slam of the same metal lockers. The fluorescent lights hummed the same monotonous tune. But for Jade and Ryder, every familiar sight and sound was rendered alien, viewed through the lens of a shared, secret history that had rewritten the very rules of their existence. The carefully constructed world of their rivalry, once as solid and predictable as the school's brick walls, now felt like a fragile illusion, and they were both terrified of shattering it with a single wrong glance. The first class they shared was history, with Mr. Davison. They entered the room separately, Jade taking her usual seat near the front, Ryder slinking into his at the back. The space between them, a distance of only 20 feet, now felt like a charged field, a minefield of unspoken words and remembered warmth. Jade could feel the weight of his presence like a physical pressure on the back of her neck. She stared intently at her textbook, but the words blurred into meaningless shapes. All her concentration was focused on the faint sound of him shifting in his seat, the rustle of his jacket, the quiet cadence of his breathing she had listened to all night. Mr. Davison, oblivious, began his lecture. He called on Jade for an answer. She started, her head snapping up, her mind a perfect, blank void. The answer, which she had known perfectly well last week, had been utterly erased, replaced by the memory of grey dawn light and a heartbeat beneath her ear. She stammered a half-formed response, her cheeks flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with embarrassment over the missed question. She could feel a specific pair of eyes on her, and the flush deepened. A moment later, Mr. Davison called on Ryder. "Care to enlighten us, since Jade seems to be daydreaming?" There was a beat of silence. Then, Ryder's voice, usually so full of lazy confidence, came out flat and uncharacteristically hesitant. I'm not sure either." A ripple of surprise went through the classroom. Jade and Ryder, both stumped by the same, simple question? It was unheard of. Jade dared a glance over her shoulder. Their eyes met for a fractured second across the rows of desks. It was not the locked, combative stare of old. It was a swift, frantic exchange of mutual panic, a silent scream of recognition before they both quickly looked away, their hearts hammering in a synchronized, frantic rhythm. The tension in the air was so thick it was a wonder anyone could breathe. The minefield only grew more treacherous as the day wore on. In the crowded hallway between periods, a surge of students pushed Jade from behind. She stumbled forward, her shoulder colliding squarely with Ryder's chest as he was pulling a book from his locker. The contact was brief, accidental, but it was like a lightning strike in the middle of the crowded hall. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through both of them. It was more than just the surprise of the impact, it was a sensory explosion that bypassed thought and went straight to memory. It was the ghost of his solid warmth against her side, the echo of his arm around her shoulders. Jade recoiled as if burned, her books clutched to her chest like a shield, her face a mask of stunned confusion. Ryder had frozen, his hand still on the locker door, his knuckles white. He looked down at the point of contact, then up at her, his eyes wide, his usual smirk completely absent, replaced by a raw, undisguised shock. For a long, suspended moment, the river of students parted and flowed around them, two unmoving statues in the midst of chaos, connected by an invisible thread of sparks. Their interactions, when they were forced to have them, were a bizarre new performance. They had to work on their history project in the library. They sat across from each other at the large wooden table, the air between them humming. Their conversation was a stilted, awkward dance. "I found the sources for the economic factors," Jade would say, her voice unnaturally formal. "Right. Good. I can start on the political ones," Ryder would respond, not meeting her eyes, fiddling with a pen. Their arguments, once fiery and passionate, were now replaced by a polite, distant agreement that felt infinitely more strange. They were trying so hard to be normal, to be the people they were before the cabin, that every word felt hollow and rehearsed. The only times the old fire flickered was when someone else tried to enter their orbit. Zane, Ryder's friend, came over to the table, slapping Ryder on the back. "Hey, man, you almost done? We're heading out." Before Ryder could even form a word, Jade heard her own voice, sharp and possessive, cut through the air. "We're having a conversation." The words hung in the silence of the library. Zane's eyebrows shot up. Ryder stared at her, his lips slightly parted. A deep, crimson blush flooded Jade's cheeks, burning with the heat of 1,000 suns. She had done the very thing she was trying to avoid. She had acknowledged the we. She had drawn a circle around the two of them and pointedly left everyone else outside. The look on Ryder's face wasn't anger or mockery, it was something closer to awe, mixed with the same blazing self-consciousness she felt. The tension was no longer just unbearable, it was a living, breathing entity that followed them from class to class, a constant, thrilling, and terrifying reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence of her own bedroom, once a sanctuary for focused study and quiet contemplation, had become an echo chamber for a single, relentless sound, his voice. Jade sat at her desk, a thick science textbook open in front of her, but the words on cellular mitosis might as well have been written in a foreign language. Her mind was a traitor, replaying scenes from the cabin on a constant, torturous loop. It wasn't the big moment she remembered most vividly, not the thunder or the initial fear. It was the small, quiet details that had burrowed deep under her skin. The way his voice had lost all its sharp edges when he said, "It's just noise." The feel of his hand, hesitant at first, then firm, on her back. The specific scent of damp cotton and cold air and something uniquely **him** that had clung to his jacket. And his smile. Not the arrogant, challenging smirk she was so familiar with, but the small, tired, genuine one she had seen in the grey dawn light. That smile was a ghost that haunted her, appearing every time she closed her eyes. She found herself analyzing every interaction they had ever had, viewing them through this new, devastating lens. Had there always been a strange, magnetic pull beneath all the anger? Was their constant clashing just a distorted, broken way of demanding each other's attention? The thought was so unsettling she had to get up and pace the length of her room. Her pride, the very core of her identity, was at war with this new, confusing ache in her chest. She had built her entire sense of self on being better than Ryder, on outshining him. Now, the thought of him felt less like a competition and more like a destination. Frustrated and utterly confused, she finally gave in and called Chloe. She paced her room as the phone rang, her words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic whisper. "Something happened on the trip," she began, her voice tight with anxiety. She didn't go into the physical details of the cabin, but she poured out the emotional aftermath, the unbearable tension, the accidental touches that felt like electric shocks, the way they couldn't look at each other without the whole world seeming to tilt. Chloe listened, her occasional, soft interjections the only sound on the other end of the line. When Jade finally finished, breathless and embarrassed, there was a long pause. Then, Chloe's voice came through, laced with a knowing, gentle teasing. "Jade," she said slowly, as if explaining something simple to a very small child. "Let me get this straight. You're constantly aware of him. Your heart races when he's near. You can't stop thinking about him. And you're trying to tell me this is *hate*?" She let out a soft laugh. "Hate isn't that complicated, and it sure doesn't feel like that. Maybe, just maybe, you never really hated him at all. Maybe you just liked him so much it scared you, and fighting with him was safer." The words landed not as a shock, but as a quiet, devastating truth. They settled in the silence of Jade's room, echoing her own secret fears. The wall she had so carefully maintained hadn't been built to keep him out. It had been built to contain the chaotic, overwhelming feelings he stirred in her. The realization was terrifying, and yet, it was also a profound relief. Across town, Ryder was facing his own moment of reckoning, though his environment was the polar opposite of Jade's quiet room. He was in Zane's chaotic basement, the air thick with the smell of stale pizza and the bass from a sound system that was too powerful for the small space. Zane was holding court, talking animatedly about his latest conquest, but Ryder wasn't hearing a word. He was slumped in a worn-out beanbag chair, staring at the pulsing LED lights, his mind 1,000 miles away, trapped in a dusty cabin. He was tormented by a sound he had never heard before, her laugh. Not the sharp, derisive laugh she used when she bested him in an argument, but the soft, unexpected, almost musical one that had escaped her in the cabin when he told a stupid story about getting lost in a grocery store as a kid. That sound was on repeat in his head, more addictive than any song. He couldn't stop thinking about the way her fire, which had always challenged him, had, in the dark, felt like a comforting warmth. He remembered the weight of her head on his chest, the trust in that simple act, and it sent a confusing, powerful surge of protectiveness through him that was entirely new. Zane, finally noticing his friend's catatonic state, threw a crumpled napkin at him. "Earth to Ryder. You've been a zombie all week. What is up with you? Still shook from getting caught in that storm?" Ryder ran a hand over his face, the noise and the light suddenly feeling oppressive. It's Jade," he muttered, the admission feeling both dangerous and necessary. Zane's eyes lit up with predatory glee. He leaned forward, a wide, knowing grin spreading across his face. "I knew it," he crowed, pointing a finger. "I knew something was up with you two in the library. So, The great Ice Queen finally got to you, huh? The one girl who's completely immune to the famous Ryder charm has you tied in knots. He laughed, a loud, booming sound. I have to say, man, I'm impressed. She actually melted you. The term Ice Queen sparked a flash of the old defensiveness in Ryder. It's not like that, he started, but the protest sounded weak even to his own ears. Zane just shook his head, still grinning. It's exactly like that. You're done for, my friend. Completely done for. He stood up, clapping Ryder on the shoulder. And you can sit here and brood about it, but I've got a party to get to. And with that, he bounded up the stairs, leaving Ryder alone in the noisy, empty basement. The silence after Zane left was different. It was filled with the echo of his friend's teasing words. She actually melted you. He thought of the cold, of the dark, of the way she had leaned into him. He thought of the unbreakable Jade, allowing herself to be vulnerable with him, of all people. Zane was right. He was completely done for. The realization didn't bring him peace like it had for Jade. It brought a fresh wave of restless, thrilling anxiety. The game was over. He just didn't know what came next. The annual night debate was the school's premier intellectual event, a spectacle held in the grand, old auditorium with its velvet curtains and dark, polished wood. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and nervous anticipation. Parents, teachers, and students filled the rows of seats, their murmurs creating a low, expectant hum. The stage was bathed in the warm, focused glow of spotlights, leaving the rest of the vast room in a pool of deep shadow. It was the perfect arena for their final, public battle, a stage set for the kind of verbal warfare Jade and Ryder had perfected over the years. But tonight, the familiar script felt like a relic from a past life, a costume they were both forced to wear. They were on opposing teams, as fate and their competitive records had dictated. Jade stood behind her podium, her hands gripping the edges so tightly the wood bit into her palms. She wore a crisp, professional blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, a uniform meant to project cool, unshakable logic. But beneath the fabric, her skin was alive with a hyper-awareness she couldn't control. She could feel him, a magnetic pull from the other side of the stage. Every shift of his weight, every quiet breath he took before speaking, was a tremor she registered in her own body. Ryder, for his part, leaned against his podium with a practiced casualness that was entirely fabricated. His jacket was undone, his tie slightly loose, the picture of effortless brilliance. But his eyes, usually scanning the crowd with easy confidence, were locked in a perpetual orbit around Jade. The spotlight caught the determined set of her jaw, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, and it was all he could do to remember his own arguments. The memory of that same jaw, relaxed and resting against his shoulder, was a devastating distraction. The debate began. The topic was complex, a thorny issue of ethics and technology. And as they started to speak, something extraordinary happened. The old, petty arguments fell away. This was not a squabble over a test score or a hiking path. This was a clash of minds, pure and undiluted. Jade laid out her points with razor-sharp precision, her voice clear and cutting through the stuffy air. Each word was a perfectly placed stone in the wall of her argument. And Ryder, rising to the challenge, met her not with arrogant dismissal, but with a fierce, respectful intensity. He countered her logic with his own, his points not designed to mock, but to engage, to challenge her on a level only he could. He questioned her assumptions, not to tear her down, but to push her, to force her to see the flaws in her own impeccable reasoning. It was a duel, but it was a dance. A dangerous, exhilarating dance under the hot lights where every parry and thrust was not an act of destruction, but of creation, creating a tension so palpable the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. During the rebuttal period, Jade turned her full gaze on him, her eyes blazing in the spotlight. My opponent, she said, her voice ringing through the auditorium, makes a compelling, yet fundamentally romantic, argument. He believes in the inherent goodness of innovation without considering the corrosive cost to human connection. It's a charmingly naive perspective, but it lacks the necessary rigor for the real world. The words were sharp, a direct hit meant to wound. But the look in her eyes as she said them, it wasn't hatred. It was a challenge, an invitation. Show me I'm wrong. Prove to me that your world is real. Ryder didn't flinch. A slow, real smile, one devoid of any smirk, touched his lips. He leaned into his microphone, his voice dropping into a more intimate register, as if he were speaking to her alone in the vast, dark room. My esteemed opponent champions caution, and there is wisdom in that. But she mistakes romance for recklessness. I don't believe in goodness, I believe in potential. I believe that the human spirit, that asterisk connection asterisk, he paused, letting the word hang in the air between them, charged with their shared secret, is not so fragile that it can be corroded by a tool. It can be amplified. To believe otherwise is not rigor, it is a lack of faith. The air crackled. Every person in the audience could feel it, the electric current that flowed between the two podiums. This was not a debate. This was a conversation that had started in a dark cabin, a conversation about fear and trust and walls, now being finished in a public spectacle with 100 silent witnesses. Every glance they exchanged was laden with unspoken history. Every word, though about ethics and technology, was a metaphor for the terrifying, wonderful thing growing between them. The dim lights, the hushed audience, the stage, it all fell away until it was only the two of them, locked in a battle where neither wanted to win, but only to be understood. And this time, as the final arguments were made and the moderator called for the vote, neither of them looked away. The tension had returned, stronger than before, and now, standing in the spotlight, neither of them had any desire to run from it. The final applause for the debate teams was a distant, muffled roar, like the sound of the ocean from inside a sealed shell. The velvet curtains swept closed, cutting off the bright, public world of the stage. The backstage area was a sudden, chaotic contrast, a dimly lit warren of ropes, sandbags, and scattered props, filled with the excited chatter and relieved laughter of the other debaters. They clapped each other on the back, dissecting their performances, their voices too loud in the confined space. Jade stood frozen for a moment, her body still thrumming with the adrenaline of the confrontation, the echo of Ryder's voice, the intensity of his gaze, ringing in her ears. She needed air. She needed to be away from the noise. Without a word to anyone, she turned and slipped through a side door that led into the main, now empty, school hallway. The silence out here was profound, broken only by the hum of the vending machine at the far end and the frantic beating of her own heart. The hallway was long and dark, lit only by the dim emergency exit signs and the pale moonlight filtering through the high windows. She leaned her forehead against the cool, painted cinder block of the wall, trying to steady her breathing, to reassemble the pieces of herself that the debate had shattered. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear his footsteps. She only felt the shift in the air, a new presence that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. She knew it was him before she even turned around. Slowly, she turned. He was standing there, a dozen feet away, still in his debate blazer, his tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. The dim light carved shadows into his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the seriousness in his eyes. The casual, performative confidence was gone. He looked as raw and as exposed as she felt. The hallway stretched between them, a vast canyon of everything they had been and everything they hadn't yet said. For a long, suspended moment, they just looked at each other. The air was so thick with unspoken words it was hard to breathe. The memory of the cabin, of the storm, of the shared warmth, of every charged glance in the hallway and every electric touch, hung between them, a ghost that could no longer be ignored. It was Ryder who finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough, stripped bare of all pretense. "I can't do this anymore, Jade." The words were simple, but they held the weight of the world. They weren't an accusation. They were a surrender. Jade's breath hitched. She wanted to retreat, to throw up a wall, to say something sharp and defensive, but the look in his eyes held her captive. "Do what?" she whispered, her own voice trembling. "This," he said, taking a single, deliberate step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "The pretending. The fighting. The acting like that night in the cabin didn't happen." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "I can't pretend I don't remember what it felt like to have you in my arms. I can't pretend I don't hear your laugh in my head every single day. I can't walk past you in the hall and act like you're just my rival." Each word was a hammer blow against the remains of her defenses. She could feel the walls, the high, strong walls she had built over a lifetime, groaning, cracking, ready to give way. She wanted to speak, to tell him to stop, but no sound came out. She could only stand there, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. He was standing right in front of her now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his dark, serious eyes. He was close enough to touch, but he didn't. He just looked down at her, his expression one of raw, painful honesty. "Every wall you built," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound meant only for her in the vast, silent hallway, "I want to shatter it. Not because I'm your rival. Not because I want to win. But because I want to be the one you let in." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and monumental. It was the truth they had both been circling for weeks, the terrifying, beautiful truth that had been born in the darkness and the cold. He wasn't trying to conquer her. He was asking to be let in. And as Jade looked up into his eyes, seeing not an opponent, but the boy who had held her through the storm, she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that every single wall was already gone. They had crumbled to dust the moment she had leaned into his warmth, and there was no point in pretending they were still there. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. It was waiting. The silence after his confession was the most profound sound Jade had ever heard. It was not an empty silence, but a full one, saturated with the echo of his words, the frantic beating of her own heart, and the final, crumbling fall of every last defense she had ever erected. He wasn't trying to conquer her. He wasn't trying to win. He was simply asking, with a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own, to be let in. And in that suspended, infinite moment in the dark, quiet hallway, Jade knew with a certainty that felt as ancient as the mountains and as new as the dawn that there was nothing left to keep him out for. The walls were dust. The war was over. She didn't answer him with words. Words were what they had always used as weapons, as shields. They were inadequate for this, for the tectonic shift happening between them. Instead, she moved. It was a single, decisive step forward, closing the minuscule gap that remained. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with unshed tears and a terrifying, exhilarating courage, never left his. She saw the shock register in his gaze, the slight parting of his lips, the intake of his breath. She saw the boy who had challenged her, infuriated her, and, in the darkest hours of her life, had held her together. She saw her rival. And she saw her only desire. Her hands came up, not in a push, but in a pull. One hand found the side of his face, her palm cupping his jaw, her fingers sliding into the hair at the nape of his neck. It was warm, solid, real. The other hand fisted in the soft, loose material of his tie, an anchor in the dizzying current pulling them together. She saw his eyes darken, his own resolve meeting hers, and then she rose onto her toes and brought her mouth to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was not a timid question. It was an answer. It was a conflagration. It was every argument, every glare, every moment of searing tension igniting at once. It was the release of all the unspoken words, all the suppressed longing, all the confusion of the past weeks. It was fire and surrender. His arms, which had been hanging stiffly at his sides, wrapped around her, crushing her to him with a desperate, possessive intensity, one hand splayed across her back, the other tangling in her hair, ruining the perfect ponytail she had constructed for her debate armor. She didn't care. She kissed him back with every ounce of feeling she had ever denied, her grip on his tie tightening, pulling him closer, as if she could fuse them into a single being right there in the silent hallway. It was a kiss that held the memory of cold floors and shared warmth, of thunder and whispered reassurances, of proud glares softening into something infinitely more dangerous. It was a kiss that tasted of tears and relief and a future they had never dared to imagine. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting together, the world had irrevocably changed. The hallway was the same, the moon still cast its pale light, but the universe had been realigned. Ryder's breath was warm against her lips. He didn't smile his old, challenging smirk. This smile was new, gentle, awed, and meant only for her. It was the smile from the cabin, now fully realized in the light. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her damp cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that made her shiver. "My rival," he whispered, the words a soft caress, "now my only desire." The words settled deep inside her, a perfect fit for the new, open space where her walls had once been. Jade looked up at him, her own smile, free of pride and full of a joy so profound it felt like flying, finally breaking through. She knew then that every shattered piece of the past had been necessary to lead them here, to this moment, to this truth. What they had was not a fragile truce. It was not a secret to be hidden. It was stronger than any hate could ever be. It was a foundation, built not on rivalry, but on the unshakable understanding of who they truly were, together. And as he took her hand, his fingers lacing perfectly with hers, they turned and walked out of the shadows of the hallway, not as rivals, but as something new, something fearless, and something that was only just beginning. Their story, born from a storm and forged in fire, was a journey of transformation, a testament to the fact that the most powerful love can often be found in the most unexpected of places, hidden behind a mask of rivalry and waiting for the right moment to shatter every wall and reveal its true, beautiful face. If you have followed Jade and Ryder on their journey from bitter enemies to each other's greatest desire, if you have felt the tension, the heartache, and the final, breathtaking release of their love story, then you understand the power of a narrative that captures the soul. This is just one of many tales where hate blurs into obsession and obsession transforms into the purest form of romance. To ensure you never miss the next story, to journey alongside other characters as they navigate the tumultuous path from loathing to longing, and to discover where hate becomes an obsession that can only be cured by love, make sure to subscribe. Your next favorite story, your next unforgettable escape into a world of mature, spicy, pure romance, is waiting for you just one click away.